Well, hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining me here today. This is Paul Taubman with 9.connects, and you are in the right place if you are here for our webinar on design reuse. And it is, in a sense, a revisiting. We did a webinar about this about 7 years ago. And so we're going to be talking about design reuse in Altium Designer and primarily looking at the tools that they have not only added, but looking back at tools they already had that they've improved. So with that being said, just a quick housekeeping note. If you have questions, feel free to write those questions. What you'll probably have up on your screen is a panel from GoToWebinar. Within that panel, you will see a region called questions. Feel free to pop that open and write those questions in there if you've got any. In the background today, I've got two of my colleagues, Tom Cassidy and Christopher Che, and so they will try to answer any of those questions if they can do so. If not, they will let me take a look at them afterwards and we'll see what we can do for you. I don't think we're going to take the full hour today, so I can definitely answer some questions after I give the presentation. All right, and with that being said, let's wake you guys up and get you moving here. Do have a polling question for you, so if you don't mind, if you can take a look at that. Just want to know if you've been using any of the following. So these would be the snippets, design reuse blocks, device sheets, manage sheets. If you just take a moment and let us know if you are currently using any of those things. Okay, so we're going to close the poll here. Hopefully you guys can see it here. So half of you here today have not used any of them or may know of them, but are not implementing any of them. And it's interesting. So no one's using the design reuse block, which is, or very few of you using it. So we'll definitely talk about that here today. And so it's scattering, but actually, interestingly enough, a good portion of you are using the device sheets, which kind of surprised me. I would have thought it'd be flipped around, but I could see why people would be using those. All right, so yeah, I appreciate you guys taking that. So now I kind of know what my audience is looking to see here today. All right, let's jump on into this over here. What are my objectives here today? Well, I've got my 3 objectives. I'm going to go through the motions of the snippets. They have greatly enhanced them since we did this webinar several years ago. So we'll look at this, the snippets, show you how they work, and especially given that they've kind of changed the panels and how they operate a little bit here. We will look at design reuse blocks, which really to me are just nothing more than snippets on steroids, and you'll see why there once we go through the motions of that. And then we'll talk about primarily managed sheets, but I will talk about device sheets. And the reason I will talk about device sheets, at least enough to show people what it is and how you can put these things together in kind of a brief fashion. If I have to go through the whole, should I say, dissertation of device sheets, we'll definitely go over an hour. I definitely want to show managed sheets because this is a relatively new feature that most people don't know about. And the other thing I'd say too is that I was reviewing the video that we did about 7 years ago, and even though it was done in Altium 17, interestingly enough, everything that is presented there still works. It's not going to have the GUI interface that we're now familiar with from the changes that they made from Altium 18 onward, but basically all the dialogues, all the features are the exact same. And so that's why I don't want to really repeat everything I did about device sheets in that last video. If you look at that, it goes into really great depth and detail as to how to make device sheets work. So that's kind of my agenda here for today. All right, so there's a couple of points I want you to note before we jump into it, and these are just 2 small but really important points. Number 1, in Altium Designer, there's no longer this thing called the Snippets panel, which we've all known and loved ever since like Altium 6. Okay, it's now known as the Design Reuse panel, and that's because that panel not only contains snippets, but it also contains the reuse block capabilities that Altium is providing. Oddly enough, the design reuse panel does not include device sheets or managed sheets, which is kind of unusual, but that's what this design reuse panel is now called, what used to be the snippets panel. And then here's a feature that when I was first putting this together, I was pulling my hair out because when you're working with snippets and the design reuse blocks, you're trying to maintain some level of connectivity between the schematic side and the PCB side. And most of you probably know that by default, if you copy something in Altium, especially it's got components in it, and it's got designators, and you've already set those designators up, then when you paste it, it resets them. Well, there's a way to prevent it from resetting those designators, and I will show you this once we get into Altium, but it's under the preferences, the schematic page, the graphical editing subpage, and about 3/4 down, you'll see a switch that says reset part designators on paste. And basically, by default, this is turned on. And so you want to turn this off, especially if you're going to do the kind of work that we're going to show you here today. Okay, so those are the only 2 points I wanted to mention here, and that's all I want to do for the PowerPoint presentation at this time. I'm going to jump back into it later on, talk about device sheets versus managed sheets, but let's not worry about that. Let's jump into Altium Designer. Hopefully now you can see my screen. I know I've got a bunch of things going on over here, especially on the projects panel over here, but bear with me because all these things are just going to help us move along through the conversation. So let's start off actually with snippets. Actually, before I do that, I promised you guys I would show you the preference. So if we go into the preference up here, the little cog, and we go into over here, schematic, and then we go into our graphical editing, and about 2/3 down, you'll see this button that says reset part designators on paste. And again, if you're going to do this kind of work, or you're just sick and tired of Altium constantly resetting your stuff because you're moving stuff and you're pasting it and you're losing all those designators, turn this off and this will be quite the lifesaver for you. Okay, so there we go. Now let's talk about snippets. Well, snippets, as I said in the past, if you went down to the panels over here, you would find something called snippets, not there anymore. It is now known as design reuse. And I do have that panel up over here. So let's click on this tab here. So right now it's showing nothing to display because I did clear out a few things from my local, but let's just take a look at the panel for a moment here. So you'll notice that up here, you'll see that it says local because you can store snippets locally. So that could be your hard drive, that could be a network drive. You can also save them in your Altium 365 account. And by the way, everything I'm going to show you today in Altium 365 does not require a pro license. So as long as you're just using a 365, everything I'm going to show you will work. Okay. So if I click over here, you can see I've got basically 2 areas. One of them is the 9.connects one, which is our A365, and then the other one is the local. So as I mentioned, I don't have anything local, but we'll put something local here just to demonstrate it here in a few minutes. So if I click over here on the 9.connects one, you can see that it is showing some of the things that's already been stored and placed up there from previous practices of this webinar. Okay. The second thing we've got over here is there's this little plus sign, but interestingly enough, the plus sign is not for a snippet, it's for a reuse block. So I think it was kind of interesting that they didn't give you a little drop down for this, but nevertheless, that's how you start the reuse block. Talk about that here in a few minutes. The next one after that is your options. So let's take a look at options over here. So with the options, really the big thing is the refresh. So if you add something in, it doesn't pop up, you'll want to refresh it. But more importantly, the snippets folder. So one of the big grievances about snippets years ago was that there really wasn't a place to store it. Altium would just kind of bury it somewhere on your C drive, and if you move to a new version of Altium, well, tough. You kind of had to do literally copy and paste from one Altium to another, and I'm not even sure that worked out really well. You probably would have had to save it in a schematic file and then open up the schematic file into another version of Altium, and then from there create the snippets. You don't have to worry about that anymore. Altium does have snippet folders that you can create. And interesting enough, you don't create them, I'd say necessarily directly through Altium, though there is a way to do it through the, and I'll show you how you can do it here in just a moment. So if you click on snippet folders, really what it's asking you for is to point Altium to where you're keeping the snippet folders. And by default, Altium's always going to give you one over here in your public documents directory. So when you download Altium, Altium gives you some samples, and it's always under the user's public. Unless you're sharing a machine with someone else, it's usually under the public documents Altium, and then whatever version of Altium you're using, then further deeper into it, examples and snippet examples here. And so you can always create it there, or if you want to add one that you've created, you can either go into Windows Explorer, create it, or you can, if you want to do it this way, you can also kind of cheat the system a little bit, saying like open folder. And then this brings me over here. Let's just go into my downloads directory. If we can find it here quickly. There we are, we're in our downloads. And over here I say new folder, and I'll just call this, let's just call it local snippets so I can just differentiate it. Snippets, and that's really all I need to do. So if I just tell it that I've got that, select the folder, and then once it contemplates its navel here, there we go. Then we've got this available to us to put those snippets in there, okay. So there you go. So I'm going to press close. All right, so let's actually create some snippets. So let's go over here to projects, and the project I'm going to work on is a classic. This is called the multi-vibrator project. If you ever did like the TU, I think it was 110, this is what Altium used to call their documents before they put everything online. this was really the introduction to Altium, and I think it's still over there. So for people who are like, I just want to dive in and figure out how Altium works, then they provide what's called the multi-vibrator project. And so this is the project that I'm using to create the snippets. I figured it was small enough and simple enough to just focus on really the mechanics here, not necessarily the circuit itself. So that's what I've done here is I've created the schematic for this, and I've also created the PCB dock. So this is a complete project. They are in sync with each other, okay? But I want to turn each one of these things now into a snippet. All right, so how do we do that? Well, first off, there's two ways to grab the snippet. One of them is through the menu over here, and the other one is by just simply selecting it and then right clicking. If you don't select it, it will not show up in either menu. So here I am just right clicking. You can see you do not see anything here for a snippet. You have to select something to do this. So I'm going to sweep over this. There we go. It's now been selected. I can right click on this, and then over here you can see that now has snippet, and doesn't give me a whole lot of options here. You just create the snippet from selected objects. And again, over here under tools, actually, sorry, I got to have it selected or I won't find it. Under tools over here, you will see, they don't always necessarily put it up over here. You've got to kind of put it under this convert. Did we put it under convert this time? Sometimes, and what I have noticed, by the way, sometimes it doesn't always show up over here. Sometimes under convert, sometimes it's just there. And let's go back over here. You're going to show it to me. No. So the best way to do it, unless I'm just completely overlooking it, yeah. So the best way to do is just simply sweep over, do a right click on it, and again, you can go into we can go into snippets and then create the snippet from the select object. So we'll just go through this route here. I'm going to click on this here, and so this is going to come up. So I got to give it a name. So I'm just going to call this MV circuit. Okay. And yeah, that's all I'm going to call it. Description, obviously you'd want to give it some good description here so people would understand what the circuit's all about. And then it's going to ask me where I'm going to save. So the default it's trying to do is actually push me into 9.connects, our A365 account, but I'm going to actually do this one local so I can show that to you. And I can click on the path over here as to which one. So you can see my local snippets is an option here. I'm going to press OK. And once we press create, then it will show up here in the design reuse. So I'll click over here. Now remember, we're seeing the 9.connects snippets and reuse blocks. Let's go over here to the local one. And now you can see that my circuit is in there. And we do basically the exact same thing for the PCB dock. So let's go over there. I'm going to scroll out a little bit, and I'm going to give you a couple of caveats about this here in a moment. Actually, let's talk about those first. So yes, you can create a snippet, but what the snippet is only capturing when you are doing the PCB side is it's just capturing the primitives. So in this example over here, you can see I changed the board shape here. The board shape's not going to come in with this. If I was to place this later on, I'll demonstrate that. And then secondly, any rules that I've set up over here will not travel along with it. So for example, if we go into design rules, you'll see that, for example, on the electrical clearances, I set these to 6. So I have clearances of 6 mils. Okay, and I needed to do that because some of these pads over here, especially on Q1 and Q2, will violate if I didn't set it below. It basically had to be below 6 something. I think it was like 6.9 and change or something like that. So I just made the clearance at 6 mils. Okay, but when I put this into a new design, and what does Altium do? It defaults it to 10, 10, 10 for minimum preferences and max. So you're going to see as a result these green lines. So Altium's not going to retain any of the information that was associated with the rules of this design. So just keep that in mind. One thing it will do, and this has always been a part of Altium, is that if this had to be multi-layers, because I routed on different layers, and let's say I've got a 2-layer board that I'm pushing this into, Altium's automatically going to add those layers in. And it's always done that even with library parts. So if you had a library part that happened to have some peculiarity where you actually were using some mid layers on there, the minute you bring those in, Altium's going to add those to your layout. So that is kind of important because let's say, for instance, you laid out some FPGA and it's got 10 layers on that, and you bring that into your board. Well, now you've committed yourself to a 10-layer board. So just be aware of that element of it. But as for the snippet itself, we're going to do the exact same thing. I can either sweep over and select everything. Just make sure you're in the multi-layer mode for visual sakes. And that's basically your Shift S. So make sure you're showing everything here so you can select it. I'm going to do a Control A, and then I will again right-click. And when I right click here, I can grab the snippets and say create the snippets from the selected objects. I'm gonna get pretty much the exact same thing I got here before. So I'll call this MV layout. Of course, I'd want to give this a good description, and I go to the local folder, make sure I'm going to put it in the same place so I'm not digging it out of different places afterwards. I'm going to press OK and create, and then we'll have this up here. Now, I'm fairly certain I can get to it in the menus on this side here. If I go into my tools and I go into convert, and you'll see that because I deselected it, it's not in here. So let me select all these things again, go into tools, and go into our convert, and now you should see the create snippet from selected objects. So it seems to work a little bit better on the layout side if you want to do it this way. Okay. All right, now that we've got these, let's get the design reuse. So they're both in here. So how do we place them? What do we get when we place them? And of course, the big question is, how do we resync them when we're using snippets? So let's go through the motions of that. Let's go back over to our project here. So I have set up my SSDD project. That's the same stuff, different day project. So we're just going to go into, it's blank right now. And so you can see that we've got everything in here. So the placement of this is pretty straightforward. I'm going to go into design reuse. I'm going to look at my which one of the snippets I want to have. So there could be much more of them here. I've just kept it kind of simple here, so I know which one to immediately pick. And I'm going to do a place. And by the way, I can place the sheet symbol as well. Okay, so if I wanted to have it, if I'm doing a hierarchical design, I could do it through that method. But I'm going to just do a place, and I'm going to drop this in. Okay, and again, this is why it's really important to turn off that reset designator thing, because ultimately on the PCB side, it retains those designators. And so I'd want to retain those over here, because the first time I did this, I was over there trying to go back and forth, trying to remember which one of these things had to be set up. And this is not that big of a design, but if you had more components, this would, you'll pull your hair out doing it. So again, make sure you use that preference to not reset the designators. So I've got this here. I'm going to go over to the other side of this. Let's go to the PCB project. And on this one, we are going to basically, again, go to our design reuse. We're going to click on our option for the PCB layout. I'm going to right click here and I'm going to place. And as I mentioned before, so let's just drop this. It doesn't really matter where I drop it. So notice the board didn't come in. Okay, so there's that element of it. And of course, as I mentioned, also we have some DRC errors because none of the information that I used to create this snippet got transported into the design rules. Okay, so there it is. Now, I'm not out of the woods yet because I got to sync this up. And there's what I'd recommend. One way you can do is you can always go into project and you can do component links and you can sync it up here. And after I've gone through this presentation a couple times, I wouldn't bother doing it this way, because in the end, if I go back over to my schematic and I go over here to design and update, the first thing it's going to ask me to do is automatically create the component links, which is the exact same thing that other feature was going to do anyways, plus the fact they've got to still assign the nets. So I'm going to click on automatically create component links. So that's now been done. And now it's going to come up with the ECO, and it's going to say, hey, I need to give you some net names. I can also give me a component class too. I'll leave it in there. It doesn't really matter because you can create as many component classes as you want. Anyways, I'm going to execute the changes, and you can see that it's now been synced up. So this project is complete in terms of getting the schematic and the PCB side all linked up together. Now it's just a matter of obviously creating board shapes, adding other components into the design, and going through the motions that we normally go through. Okay, so that's the way we would normally handle the snippets. With that, let's move over to the design reuse block. So this is, as I said, snippets on steroids, because in the end, you're going to kind of see something very similar to this over here, but Altium is trying to keep things a little more together. And there's two ways to really create this block. And actually, I need to take one step back. Unfortunately, design reuse does not work locally. You will have to use A365. Fortunately, you do not have to have the pro version for it to work. There's two ways to do it. One way is to go through File, New, and then you'll see Reuse block here. Okay, and if you do this and you're not logged in over here on the top right corner, it's going to probably prompt you to do that, because again, it's going to have to save it to the server when everything's said and done. The second way to do is just hit this button. So we'll click on the button over here, and you'll see this thing whirling around saying creating the user block, please wait. And when it's done, it's going to pop up the project panel, and it's going to give us this over here. So if you look here, you'll see that it says new reuse block, okay? And the reuse block is a slightly different icon than from a regular project. And what it automatically gives you is a schematic doc and a PCB doc, okay? And so when I was first playing with this, I said, you know what, I'm going to put something really cool in here, and I'm just going to take, because I was thinking that originally you could just drop whatever else you wanted into it, because it's like a project, and that it would be able to handle multiple sheets and the so on and so forth. So I downloaded this one thing from the Ultra library. It was basically some application board for a TI component. And I quickly realized that you cannot just simply take these things and drag them in. So that's the first thing. So you cannot have more than one schematic sheet in a reuse block. You can actually have more than one PCB, because the way Altium's literature explains it is that you might have a mirror image to something, or that you may have some circuit that is similar, but the layout is different. And so it actually allows you to add multiple PCB documents, but it only gives you one schematic doc sheet. Now, of course, I'm looking at it saying, well, maybe I can use the add new to project, but the only thing in add new to project is just another PCB. So if I was to take this project, like, and I'll open up page 3 so you can take a look at it. There was a couple other things on some of the other pages, but when I was originally playing with this, basically I was going to have to make the page wider, and I was going to have to add all these other things in here as well. I said, okay, I'm going to step back and use something a little bit simpler. But I just wanted to kind of indicate to you that there are some limitations to this new reuse block, that everything has to fit on one schematic document. And yes, you can have multiple PCB documents to go with it, okay? So that's that. Now, as for the schematic doc, we do have to kind of treat this like a project. So if I'm going to drop the stuff in, I'm literally going to do the same thing I just did before. And I can either use the snippets, or I can go back into my other projects and copy and paste those. So I'll just do that here since it's local to me, and I'll grab this one, paste it in, and I'll do the same thing over here. Grab this one, open this document, grab this one. I can take this one. It doesn't matter where it really comes from. It's all one half dozen of the other at this point. So I'm going to copy, excuse me, hold on. Try that. Oh, didn't mean to paste it. Let's try that one more time. Control C, I forgot it gives me a prompt. So let's grab that here. There we go. And let's drop that in here. Now, as I mentioned earlier, same thing applies from the snippets. It doesn't matter what design rules I have set up. It doesn't matter if the board is something completely different. It's not going to get pulled in when I do with this block. I do have to make sure that these are linked with each other, so I'll go through the motions of that. So I'm going to go into design, update the PCB doc, and we're going to see the exact same thing we just saw with the snippets. I'm going to create the link, and then at this point, I'm going to execute the changes, and I'm going to grab everything and close it. So this is now set to go. Okay, let's push it to the server. So let's do save to server, and so we'll now get our prompts as to, what are we going to call this thing? That's kind of the interesting part, is you just say, well, we'll worry about the name of it after you push this to the server, when you push it to the server. So we will call this the MV circuit. And I will put the date in front of this because there's a couple of other ones that are in there, and I want to make sure I grab the right one. So this is today's date. And again, you'd want to give this a description. The folder's already been set up for this. And by the way, even if you don't set up this, Altium will automatically create one for you. And if you're familiar with Altium 365, once you create it, if you don't like where they put it, you can move it. That's one of the few areas where Altium doesn't get really stubborn or persnickety. You can move the folders where you need to, and it's going to be fine with it. Okay. It's only when you start changing properties, you start moving files in and out of folders that had some type of component, let's say template relationship or something of that nature, that's when it'll get a little more persnickety. Let's press OK, and we'll get this into the server. What will happen is that once this is in the server over here, this will disappear. All right. And once that disappears, I'll show you where it is here in the server. So let's go to panels, and let's go to the Explorer, and let's bring that up here. So you get a little peep into what we've got over here at 9.connects. Yours obviously will be a little bit different, but a lot of times people will have something called managed content, especially if they're using the folder structure that came with it. And so within the folder structure, you'll see that we have our design reuse blocks. You can see the reuse block is right over here, okay? And so that's our circuit that we have. And so now it's available for us to use. So let's put it into a design, because it's kind of, there are some subtle differences, actually some really nice differences between what you do with the snippet, or what happens with the snippet versus what happens if you bring this into if you bring it as a design reuse block. So I'm going to go back over to my my project over here. I am going to delete this, and I'm going to delete this one here. So sweep over both of those, delete those. I will save each one so that it's clear, make sure that all the routing and any of the netlist stuff's been removed from it. So here, how we add it in, we're going to click on design reuse again. We're going to go up to our little drop down. We're going to go to 9.connects. And here we can see that here is our circuit. And what they'll do is they'll show you both the schematic and the PCB. But really all you need is the schematic side. You can look at that. But what this is telling you is that these are related. Whereas snippets will show you the schematic and they'll show you the PCB separately. Okay. So on the schematic one, this is fine. The placement's going to be very similar to the way we did the other one. I'm going to just do a place. And once I do that, I'll drop this in. Now, what's neat about this is unlike the snippets, I don't have to do anything more to the other side of the PCB dock. All I need to do is say, okay, do design, update, and it's going to tell me, in fact, it's not going to try to link it because it's already been linked through the design block here. It's just saying, okay, these are the things that are going to be added to the new sheet. I will execute the changes. And this is what's really cool about it. If we scroll down, what we get out of this is the design that's off here. So it's everything came in all at once. And then you can move it accordingly to where you need to put it. Okay. So that's really the benefit of using the reuse sheet versus just using individual snippets. So something to consider. Okay, so with that, I'm going to move over to device sheets and manage sheets. I'm going to jump back into my PowerPoint presentation because there's a few things we got to talk about there. So I am going to bring that back up for you guys to see here. Let's talk about what a device sheet is first of all, because it seems like a lot of people do know it, but for those who are new about it, what is it? Because you've talked about it, but you've probably never really seen it, but yet at the same time, you've probably been looking at one the whole time. So it's the ability to preserve a schematic sheet for future use. So let's say you put together a really cool voltage regulator and you're saying like, I want everybody to use this one in the future. Now, yes, you can do it through a snippet because the snippet can have a PCB side. You can use the reuse block because there's a PCB side. But when it comes to a device sheet, there's only a schematic side to it. Okay, so there's no what they'll call layout device sheet. So if you're going to do this, you're going to do this on the schematic side of things. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Now, there's two terms that are getting thrown around rather loosely, but they're actually very different, and the way you handle them are very different in Altium Designer. There's device sheets, and then there are managed sheets. Okay, device sheets, let's talk about those first. They're either kept on a local or a network drive. If you're trying to put these into your 365, they are known as managed sheets. They are handled differently. Okay, so device sheets are the local network drive. They operate the same since their inception. I think they've been part of Altium Designer for like over 15 years because I was working at Altium when they introduced device sheets. Everybody was really interested in them at the time. So I know they've been in Altium for the longest time. Okay, and that's what we've always called them, as device sheets. And the features are not applicable to managed sheets. So there are three areas, and I'll show you what they are in Altium Designer here in a few moments. One of them is the preference page. So there's a device sheet preference page, very similar to what we saw earlier with the snippets. You can tell it which folders these things are in. You can do the exact same thing, but here they actually don't really have it as a panel. They actually have it as a preference page. And then there's a feature called place device sheet symbol. We'll look at this again too. You're not going to find any managed sheets here when the dialog comes up. And lastly, there's this thing called refactoring, which is a mechanism for changing certain sheets into like local sheets. So sometimes people create a device sheet and they're like, well, this is great, but I got to make some changes to it. And I don't want to make changes to the original one. So you refactor it so that it becomes local to your drive. So the refactoring capability is not also part of the managed sheet. So these are all things that the device sheets can do that managed sheets can't do. Oh, then I did want to mention this. I think I mentioned it earlier on as well. We did this video about 7 years ago. If you want to know a lot more about device sheets and what I'm going to show you here today, then definitely take a look at this video. I was looking at this throughout the entire time I've been working on putting this presentation together, and I've really found nothing in there on the device sheets that have changed. And so I'd encourage you to look at this if you really want to get deep into device sheets and the capabilities of it. I'll give you enough to be dangerous with it in this webinar, but unfortunately I can't give it the full, I'll say, dissertation that I gave it in this prior webinar. All right, let's talk about managed sheets for a moment. So in managed sheets, they are kept in A365, Concorde Pro, Enterprise, whatever they're calling it this week, okay? But it is going to be in one of their documentation systems. And in order, you have to use the Explorer panel, which is really an interesting thing, because normally Altium has been trying to get people out of the Explorer panel, and yet if you want to use device sheets, you have to use it for uploading, for placement, and for editing. So just keep that in mind if you're going to use managed sheets. But they will look very similar to a device sheet when everything's said and done. Okay, let's not go to the polling question yet. Let's do some demonstrations. So I'm going to click out of my PowerPoint. Let's get you back over here. As I mentioned with the device sheet, what I did over here is I actually created a test sheet so I could kind of show you ahead of time without having to build it up. So a couple of things to know. If you want to create this device sheet, again, you have a schematic sheet that you really like and you just want to preserve it and use it again, one of the fastest ways to do that is just create a folder in your local directory and copy that SCH doc into that directory, and then tell Altium that it's a device sheet. And the way we do that is under Preferences, and we're going to go over here to Data Management, and under Data Management, you're going to see Device Sheets. And here you can tell it which folder you want to have as a device sheet. So I created one locally here, one called Device Sheet, that I've already set up here just before the webinar. But if I want to add one in, I could do it the exact same way that I did for the snippets. Okay, and in fact, Altium also again gives you a default one up here for device sheets, just to give you an example that it's there. To basically create a device sheet, the way you would go about doing this, and this is really important here, is that if you are going to create a device sheet, you really have to basically have to have a, I'm sorry, I'm in the wrong one. Let's go over here. Because if you just simply take this over here and say, I want to create a device sheet, there is a way to do it locally in Altium Designer. It's called refactoring. And so if you go to Edit, Refactor, then the only thing it's going to allow you to do is move the subcircuit to a different sheet. But what I want to do is activate the convert sheet symbol to a device sheet. Okay. In order to do this, I really have to do this from a top sheet. So you have to create a top sheet. You have to compile this. Okay. And then once you've done that, then you can ultimately create this. So that's the key thing here. So with device sheets, one of the big things that gets overlooked is that device sheets are basically what they call symbol sheets, right? So in a hierarchical design, you have this, and unfortunately, I don't have any ports on this here, but if you look here on my project, you can see that on the top here, the device sheet is indented from the top to indicate that this over here is associated with this sheet over here. Okay, and if there was ports on this, you would see sheet entries to this, and this is where you can start to do the refactoring if you want to create that refactoring and put this in there. So the two ways to do it is either through up here in the folders, or you can do it through the refactoring. In fact, it should be able to do it unless it already sees the one that I've got here. So let's do Edit and Refactor, and there it is. And then I can say, okay, convert the schematic sheet to a device sheet. And it will go through the process of doing it. As I said, for time considerations, I'm probably not going to go through all the motions of that. And again, take a look at the other video if this is of interest to you. Okay, so there's the first way. That's what's called the device sheet method. But I want to talk about the managed sheet because again, the managed sheet doesn't seem to give any details. Actually, there's one other thing, and sorry, I'm jumping around in my head over here. I want to make sure I capture all the features of it. If I want to place a device sheet, and again, I've already had one created here, I can go into Design, Place, and if we go into Place, we have the device sheet symbol. I'm going to click on this here, and then you can see that I've already got this here, and I can place it down. I'll press OK, and there you go. And so there it is. And so if you're using a device sheet symbol, you do have this little symbol over here, and just a little quick tip if you're trying to jump in and say, well, what does it associate with? I can hold down my control key and double click. This is one I think I created. Yeah, I remember creating this when I realized I had an incorrect port on this, but at least you can see that this is what it creates as a result of it. And you can refactor this down in such a way that if you're saying like, well, I need to make changes to this, there are ways to make those changes. And that's again through the refactoring. You can go into Edit, Refactor. You're not gonna do it this time? Okay, let's go to Device. I think I gotta do it to the top level here. This one, and let's see if we can edit this, go into Refactor. Yeah, and then I can convert it to a schematic sheet. So that's the neat part about that, is that if you have these saved off and you do need to make some changes to it, as long as you do everything really on its top level, you can get it into the schematic sheet. And again, I'm not trying to rush through this here. I just wanted to mention that, again, we go into full detail in that other webinar, and I just want to give some people some ideas of what this looks like for their, their consideration. But I do want to get onto the manage sheet. So for the manage sheet, what do we need to do? Well, the manage sheet is a little bit different. I got to start this one in the Explorer panel. So I'm going to bring that back up here. And in the manage sheet, I'm going to go back to manage content. And there's even a directory that exists for these. So this would be different than the design reuse blocks. You can see that over here. And if you need to create one, just to let you know, because Altium will generally create these automatically, but for this one, I think we had to create this first. What you would do is you'd right click and you would go into properties. Or if you're going to create a new subfolder, I'll just create a new subfolder just to demonstrate it. It doesn't matter which one of these things you click on, because in the end, you're going to have to change the folder type to what they say the schematic is, not schematic templates. Those are SCHDOT files, okay? So don't create that. These are just managed schematic sheets. So this is what you'd create for that. And then you give it a name. And then if you need to change the naming scheme, you change the naming scheme. Okay, so let me jump into this one over here. So you can see we've been playing with this one, and this is where we've got it. And what's neat about this is that it not only shows you what the sheet is, it also shows you all the parts that are in there and the revisions on those parts as well. Okay, so that's kind of a neat feature of this. And so if we want to create a new one, it acts in a very similar way that we showed you when we did a webinar a little while ago on how you bring up templates. The same idea works. So if I say I want to add a sheet, I'm going to do so. So I'm going to click on Add Sheet, and I'll call this one MV Circuit. Okay. The description, obviously, you want to give a good description, and then you'd ultimately want to make sure that your revision control and your life cycles are set up if you're using Pro. The big thing over here is where it says open for editing after creation. I'm going to turn this off, and I'd encourage you to turn it off, because otherwise it's going to open up a new sheet and you're going to have to copy and paste everything you did into that sheet. If it's simple enough, that might be an easy thing to do, but I want to show you this method of just taking your file and uploading it up. So I'm going to press OK, and so what will happen here is it will give me a placeholder. Okay, and so if you are not using the Pro version, you're not going to necessarily see the revision state over here, but it will create your placeholder here. And from that point, I'm going to right click and I'm going to say upload. So now I know I already have this in several locations. Of course, I do always encourage you to put a release note in there since it's a revision control system. So I'll say initial release, and I will click on add. And it doesn't really matter where I pull this from. I can pull it even from a local snippets if I want to, or I can pull it from a project. So I'll pull it from here because that's where it just happened to be, and I'll press OK. And then this will add this up here, and this will change to a draft mode. And it'll bring it back up here. Okay, with that being said, well, how do I place it? Well, interesting enough, again, you have to place it from here. I don't know of a mechanism either in the design reuse or in the menu. There might be, but I wasn't able to find it based off the literature I was looking at here. So if I want to use this one, I'll just right click here and I will say place. And when it does place it, it's going to look like a device sheet. Okay, and there you go. And then from there, the same idea of refactoring and those type of things can, in fact, you don't even really have to, well, I guess you could refactor this one. Yeah, if you wanted to, you could say, I want to take this and I want to change it to however I want to do it. I can certainly do that. I can always go back here and edit, refactor, and are you gonna let me do it? Oh, one other thing I found is a lot of times in order for this to work, you have to save it and you've got to validate it. And so I'm probably not happy with all the stuff I've got in there, but I should be able to select on this now and tell it to refactor it. Factor, nope, I'm not gonna do it today, are we? Okay, and if we go over here to this one, and we should be able to do this because this is not a read only. Oh, I know what it is, I apologize. And this is why I get confused with the device sheets and the manage sheets. The manage sheets over here, you don't have to refactor it because this is a read only. Okay, so if I hold down my Control C, double click into it to make sure I get into the right one. If I want to save this and play with it, in fact, if I do a right click and I do a save, it's immediately going to tell me that this is a read only. So I'm going to right click on, so it's automatically telling me, give me another name for it. So I'll just keep copy of and press save. And then this will now, if I bring this up over here, I can make use of it and just move it in and take the other one out. Okay. So yeah, it works a little bit differently than the device sheets. Okay. All right. Well, that's what I wanted to show you with this over here. I want to jump back over into our, I'm going to jump back over here into our web, into our PowerPoint. And we've already talked about those. So I do have a polling question for you. If you don't mind, let's bring that one up. So now that you've seen these, are you interested in using any of those or planning on using any of those? So you can click all that apply. Well, great. So hopefully you guys can see what's up there. So a lot more of you will definitely take a look at the snippets. Looks like a lot of you will take advantage of some of the ones I've shown you here, you know, that we've shown here today, especially the design reuse block. So that's a really good sign that, you know, that hopefully what we showed you here today will be of use to you. Okay, great. Well, I got one other question for you. What do you think of the webinar? So if you can take a moment there and give me your honest opinion. Okay, and so to show that, thank you guys, thank you very much, everybody, for your feedback on that. And as for the percentage where it says good content but not applicable to me, I still appreciate the fact that you were here, because now at least you know there's these capabilities in Altium. So if that question ever arises, that's like, man, it'd be nice if we had this capability to reuse this thing, then you can be an active part of that discussion. Okay, with that, sorry, let me jump over here. Let me talk about a couple minutes for 9.connects. Why are you here? You're here for a reason, right? To learn and refresh yourself about design reuse, to learn if there are features that would be of use to you, and of course, to see if features have been added since you've last spent some time in it. And obviously, it's been several years since we've played with it, so it's kind of good to get back in there and see what Altium's added to it. What do we do here at 9.connects? We provide PCB design. Well, and again, we always like the ugly stuff. So if you're doing DDR, high speed, flex, RF, come talk to us. Even if you're going to do it on your own, come talk to us, just so that we can ensure that you're on the right path on things and that you're not going to paint yourself in a corner. With the trainings, we do our PCB foundation class for those who are just trying to get a grip and handle on the entire process on the design side. We do our full spectrum training, which is great for both those who are new to Altium and those who have experience. There's always something to be learned in there. And of course, we also do our Altium 365 and enterprise trainings as well. Okay. For our services, we do libraries, restoration, creation, migration. People's libraries always need that cleanup element to it, and so we can help them out with that tremendously. Also, librarian services, we do help a number of companies get their parts set up for their designers, so designers can focus on the design and not all the minutia of library stuff. And also Concord Pro.